Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm John Lazarus with Stories Matter and D&E Publishing. Today's video is the first installment in our how-to series where I'm going to be talking about how to improve your writing. And in our first chapter today, we're going to look at some ways in which we can make our characters more compelling. But first, we have a word from our sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Guns. Guns help more than 300 million Americans fight boredom and build confidence. Guns, your key to winning every argument. Available now at local supermarkets and street corners. Alright, so let's take a look at some steps in which we can make our characters more interesting. So step 1, provide your character with strong opinions. So as a writer, it's likely you are naturally meek and uninteresting. People look at you and they see someone who is very passive, who's weak, someone that cowers from responsibility and has absolutely no charisma. And that's to be understood, right? You're a writer because you're trying to fill a void that more attractive people fill with sex and wine and beach parties. However, it's important that you create characters that are different from yourself. People want to read about characters who are strong and active, characters that are reckless and impulsive, the kind of people who take life by the throat. Let's look at an example of what I'm talking about. So, in this rough draft, we have John. And John is a self-insert who doesn't know what he's going to do with his life and thinks, maybe the Holocaust wasn't such a big deal. I don't know. Now, in this example, the author is just obviously trying to channel their own uncertainty. But characters like this aren't very fun to read about, right? We need someone with strong convictions. So after the edit, we can see that now John is a self-insert 20-something who doesn't know what to do with his life and knows the Holocaust never happened. Now this is a character we can start to identify with. Okay, step 2. Unpredictability is key. Stories are about surprises. In Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, for example, nobody could have predicted the two main characters would murder an innocent family. Alright, so if you're writing, your character needs to show growth and change. They need to make decisions no reader could ever, in 1 million years, ever predict. Preferably your characters should make inexplicable decisions every single chapter. And this will keep the reader on their toes. Let's look at a couple of examples. So in our first story, we have Stanislaus. Stanislaus is a conformist butcher who does what he's been told and only makes meat from animal parts. Now, until one day, he decides he's going to rebel and makes meat from human parts. Oh, that's an interesting change. In our second example, we have Stanislav, who is a humdrum liberal arts philosophy professor. But then one day, he decides he's going to stop trying to turn his students into atheists, and he's going to church to pray instead. So these are two examples of character change that is unique, but also very believable and understandable. Alright, step 3. Grudges are another key. So a grudge can be a great way to show conflict at the beginning of a story. And it makes your world building, feel lived in. Think about Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov and how different he might be if he didn't have his grudge against Hitler. Okay, as a species, I think humans are naturally hold grudges. We are vengeful, fearful of outsiders, territorial, bloodthirsty, and willing to self-sabotage as long as it means hurting somebody else. We are against pantheism and most other kinds of monotheism. Okay, let's take a look at what I'm talking about. So, many years ago, I wrote a courtroom drama called The Subtle Subpoena. And I set up very early on in the story that our protagonist has a certain grudge against a certain type of people who work for a certain type of law firm that is historically associated with a certain type of race that has a certain type of shiftiness, for reasons that my publisher has asked me not to get into. I never explicitly state what it is, but nevertheless, the reader gets the point. Step 4. It's all in a name. So character names are a great way to evoke meaning and bestow attributes. Like think to Shakespeare. It's not likely Shakespeare would have named his star-crossed lovers Romeo and Juliet if those names weren't already associated with lust and passion. A character name should be memorable, evocative, not Jared or Braden, alliterative, and if possible, an obscure color like smaragdine or burnt sienna. Now, sometimes as a writer, I find it's helpful to think of the interesting name first and then decide what type of character that person should be. So let's look at a name. Zebulon Gieswax of the Ursa Antilles cluster. Okay, when I look at this name, I think, okay, this character is probably not a general in the Confederate Army, and they're probably not a present-day dental hygienist. However, this character could be in a grounded family drama if we set it in the year 4789. Step 5. The third key is an interesting job. I know what you're thinking. I'll make my protagonist a writer. Okay, that's what I delude myself into thinking I am, and hey, write what you know, right? Well, let's take a step back and think about that. Writers don't make compelling characters. In fact, if you look closely, no classic work of literature ever has had a writer as the main character. Some other bad ideas include sea captains, hippies, refugees who do nothing but complain, a person who is retired and therefore has no job, animals with the possible exception of police dogs if we focus just on their work life. Now the following list is some ideas I have that is by no means exhaustive, although I will say that I could not think of any other examples. So they include truck drivers, professional golfers, podcasters who are trying to uphold repeated attempts to dismantle the Second Amendment, and lawyers who happen to be female. Well, that's all for today's video. I hope this was a help to all you aspiring writers out there. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll leave you with this work's words of inspiration. See you next time.